The NCPA, which again is a union there, announced the move 10 months after filing the charges with the NLRB. The NCPA, God, this is the thing about HR, is there's so many freaking acronyms. It is what it is. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master Football, back at it again. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on everything college football, pro football, Madden, EA college football, NFL draft, anything related to American football, hit that red subscribe button. We will not be disappointed. Also, the like button too. Okay, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do all that. I really appreciate it. Also, today's first ever video we're going to be posting to Twitter. I got my Twitter Blue. I don't know if it has my badge up there yet. But again, this is going to be posted concurrently to Twitter Blue as well as YouTube. So, like me, subscribe me, also follow me. Without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, guys, there's so much news that's happening right now. There's big news that happened recently just about, a couple of universities getting invited to the American Association of Universities. We got South Florida, we got Arizona State, we got Notre Dame, we got Miami, a couple other schools like that. So lots of news over there. However, I want to take my video here in a different direction. We keep on hearing a lot of different things here. Oh my gosh, so we had NIL, we had this and that. There's a conversation about NCAA athletes being considered employees, and there's plenty of good reasons for that. We have an article we're going to go through here, and then a short presentation I have because we have to answer some questions about what that would look like, what the differences between the types of employments there are, and everything like that. Remember here, my night job, I moonlight as a YouTuber, but I am an HR employee in real life, so we'll check into that too, because there's certain things that you have to remember here from an employee perspective, different than an athlete or somebody who is giving a gift. Again, scholarships were considered gifts for the longest time. So lots of things to remember here. This is just a start of the conversation. This is not going to be exhaustive because we have so many more questions to answer from here. Let's get into that article real quick, and then we'll go through my presentation. Here we are on SI.com. It says significant NLRB move will aid in pursuit of college athletes becoming employees. NLRB is the National Labor Relations Board. And again, I know that I'm a super sophisticated HR employee. I should know that. Anyways, this came out December 15th of 2022, just this last year. So it says right here, the interview last January, ESPN lead football analyst Kirk Herbstreit made a proclamation: you might as well make college athletes employees. I say we're on a path to unionization, he said on the Pardon My Take podcast. That's where we're headed. Less than a year later, the movement to make college athletes employees of their universities took another significant step. The National Labor Relations Board's Los Angeles region plans to pursue unfair labor practice charges against USC, the Pac-12, and the NCAA as a single and joint employers of FBS football players and D1 men's and women's basketball players. The NCPA, which again is a union there, announced the move 10 months after filing the charges with the NLRB. The NCPA, God, this is the thing about HR, is there's so many freaking acronyms. It is what it is. The NCPA's goal is to affirm employee status for Division I basketball players, men and women, as well as FBS football players. I'll let you know right now. We're going to go into what is considered a scholarship versus non-scholarship versus partial scholarship, because there's a lot of different things there with, revenue sports versus non-revenue sports, blah, blah, blah. There's so many things to go through that. Continuing on here. It says a ruling is still many months away, but the NLRB's latest move, while expected, is a giant leap forward in the fight to have college athletes become employees. USC, the Pac-12, and the NCAA will likely soon stand trial to fight the charge, legal experts saying. So come down here, we want to make sure we go through a couple things here. The NCPA dropped the charge against UCLA, a public school, in its original filing. The NLRB's ruling for now would only apply to private schools. Again, so USC is a private school, UCLA is not a private school. So there's a bunch of things that's going on here. There's already a players' union that's formed. Whether or not it's going to happen, there's so many questions to answer from here, but it is absolutely crazy. This is also an extremely important resource out here about the NCSA college recruiting, sports.org. There's, again, all the acronyms. I hate HR. It is what it is. But it says athlete scholarships, everything you need to know. So one thing that I want to make sure I go over here, because we're going to go over a couple different things here as well. But again, I want to make sure that I get in through my presentation. So the full versus the partial scholarships is an important aspect here. So it says right here, head count sports are always full rides, but they only include revenue sports. For that, it's men's D1 basketball and D1A football. For women, it's D1 basketball, tennis, volleyball, and gymnastics. Equivalency sports usually hand out partial scholarships. So again, for men, it's baseball, rifling, skiing, cross country, track and field. For women, it's bowling, lacrosse, rowing, cross country, track, all the sports that nobody really cares about. That's basically what they're saying there. So again, that right there was just a breakdown of kind of what's going on. There's lots of things happening in the National Labor Relations Board and the National College Players Association and the National bunch of acronyms. Anyways, continuing, I have a short presentation here that I want to go through because there's things you have to remember here. The difference between what happens when you're an employee versus not, what types of employees there are, what happens to the product on the field if there are employees, what are some considerations, what are some cool things that actually might come from this. Let's get into that presentation right now. First thing we need to do is kind of make sure we go through the types of employees. So we have the types of employees and we have contingent employees over there on the right. So types of employees, obviously full-time employees, part-time employees. Remember here, from what I understand, again, I might be incorrect here, but from what I understand is that NCAA athletes are only allowed to have 20 hours of work per week. And again, so that could be massaged up or down mostly up, depending upon the university. And again, one of those things where it's like, oh, is it a voluntary workout? And it's not a voluntary workout. I don't know the situation there. But then there's part-time, there's temporary employees. That's important to remember here when we're talking about scholarships. Scholarships are technically considered one-year agreements that are re-upped every year, depending upon how a player does. There's contract employees, different than a temporary employee, where a contract employee agrees to a certain amount of time period that can always be negotiated up. Temporary employees, for the most part, can be kept on afterwards, but they're given a for sure end date, and then they could give a extension after that, something like that. There's also seasonal employees, and then there's leased employees. I have an awesome slide here at the very end about leased employees because that's a really cool concept. We'll go into that in a minute. You got contingent workers here. So I said it's a contract employee, a W-2. That's what happens with NFL players. They are contracted W-2 employees. It's contingent upon them signing the contract. They agree to the contract. The employer agrees to the contract, and so on. There's an independent contractor who's a 1099 employee. They are employees, but they're not full employees. They have to pay part of their own taxes. They usually get higher wages than a W-2 employee, but they don't have all the benefits, medical benefits, 401k, things like that. There's also internships. And again, we're going to go through internships because interns are unpaid. Guess who else is unpaid in these instances? Walk-ons. That's a huge consideration. Not many people have thought about so far. And there's also consultants. Consultants are kind of their own interesting situations there. I don't think it's really going to deal here with, players in college sports. These are just some. This is just some of the considerations for employees when you're thinking about athletes to employees and that transition. Employees are entitled to wages. Now, what do we do here? Are the wages the scholarship? Is this going to be, their stipends that they get? Is this going to be their NIL money? I bet all of that is going to be included here. Remember with that, employees are also required to pay taxes on that. So in addition to those taxes, employers have to pay taxes too. The Social Security and the Medicare taxes, there's, I think, about 7.5% there, roughly, by both employee and employer. They both have to pay those taxes. That's something you have to go through that situation. Employers with more than 50 full-time equivalent employees, remember here, these universities have thousands of employees. If you're an employer with more than 50 full-time equivalent employees, you are required to comply with ACA regulations on benefits, basically medical benefits. You're required to pay for them. There's some safe harbors you have to match. There's lots of things like that. Basically, all of these employees working for universities that already have thousands of employees, they will be required to be given medical benefits that satisfy ACA regulations. ACA is the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Injured employees on the job go on workers' comp. That's another consideration here. So somebody injures their ankle. Oh, okay, so they aren't going to be able to play in the game, but they can still go to class. What about a head injured employee? So this is an employee now who's going to school. It's weird. They're simultaneously employee and they're also, almost customer of the university. So think about that. Do head injured employees have the right to miss school work or miss schoolwork? So do they? I don't know, because technically you're on workers' comp. This is you had a concussion. You're not able to perform your job duties or even able to perform your duties as a student. Do you get to extend that time period? Does the entire university going to bend their back over for you? First of all, they already do in many instances. Again, lots of weird questions to go through there. Employers, this is another important point here. Employers have to comply with federal and state regulations on employment. That depends on the state. The state's more important in that instance. So as an example, I'm in HR and there's a lot more requirements on the state of California than there are in the state of Idaho, there are in the state of Texas, that there are in the state of Oklahoma. So all of those employees have to comply with those overtime rules, this and that compensation, whatever the situation is there. Remember here, right to work states do not require union membership to join a profession. So we saw that there the NCPA is a union. So a right to work state says, no, you are not required to join a union when you be an athlete in a certain, or an employee in a certain profession. So there's the non-right to work states, and this is the great debate there, where a non-right to work state says, no, if you want to be an electrician, you have to join this private institution. I personally think that's BS. I also think it's a violation of the First Amendment, blah, blah, blah. However, the union side also has their own point where the union side says, well, hey, hold on a second. So if you're in a right to work state and you want to work for an employer that has been working with a union and they pre-negotiate a contract, you come in, you signed the same contract that was negotiated with them. You didn't pay any dues for that. You got the benefits without any of the payments. I can totally see that perspective too. Again, a lot to work through there. The last thing here too is unpaid internships are largely being seen as exploitative now. I'm going to go through an article about that because, again, you think about the walk-ons is a huge consideration here. What the hell do you do? I have no idea. Here we are at bestcolleges.com, and it says, are unpaid internships legal and worth it? So again, this was in May of 2020. And again, it goes through this here. It says unpaid internships are still legal in many cases, but are increasingly considered exploitative. Remember that situation there. So if somebody's getting paid, let's just say they're fourth string on the roster, and somebody fifth string on the roster is an intern, so or an unpaid, a walk-on. So one of them isn't getting paid. The other one is getting paid and paying wages. The only difference is whether or not they're on the 85 scholarship limit. Is that considered exploitative? We're already talking about the athlete relationship with the university is exploitative. Now we're talking about an intern who has to work X amount of hours, doesn't get any compensation, actually has to pay money to play football. A lot of questions to answer there. This is a huge one. Now, this could be negotiated depending upon a union and a contract and this and that. But remember here, verbal job offers are legally binding. I offer you a job. You have certain protections against, me removing it without your consent, something like that. I actually have to have a reason to do that. Again, there's certain rules around that. It's hard to prove those in court. But remember, they are legally binding in the same way that employees who verbally accept job offers must accept the job. So you think about the entire scholarship offering situation there. So those are going to be legally binding. Imagine when they're 15 years old, somebody like that, they see this guy's going to be a star. His brother's in the NFL. He's 14. He's coming up. Somebody offers him a scholarship at 14. He says, sure, that's legally binding. Whether or not it's close enough to the date or not, again, that's all for a court to decide. But those are certain things we have to work our way through that we don't really talk about right now. Verbal job offers are legally binding, and employees who verbally accept the job offers also must accept the job. Now, these are some what if, and so again, what if athletes are employees? There's a couple things I think will happen. This is a projection here. This is my perspective. It says first thing that's going to happen is they're going to unionize. We already see the NCPA is already forming out there. That first line says they don't have to join a union in a right to work state. So that's very important there. So what happens in that instance? Do they have to does every single player have to pre-negotiate their deal? Do they the university just copy and paste from the unionized employees? I have no idea what the situation is there, but remember, in a right to work state, you do not have to join a union. In other, non-right to work states, if there's a union that's signed an agreement with the state, you have to join that union. Remember here, different conferences, universities may form their own unions, and strikes could affect conferences or individual schools. That would be crazy. So if everybody's not on the same union, then it's all up to hell in a handbasket. We already know that different universities and even different schools, independent schools, have their own TV negotiated, revenue. So imagine if there's different, unions for different schools, different conferences, and they strike, blah, blah. There's a ton of things that can happen in that instance. Also, remember here, athletes will be considered contract W-2 employees similar to NFL players. And again, a 1099 versus W-2 employee, there's an important consideration there where a 1099 employee is kind of their own entity. They operate on their own. They kind of show up as they will. They do the work as they will, and the company pays them. Whereas a W-2 employee, the employer has control of where they're at. They tell them what to do, blah, blah, blah. Which one sounds more like college football players? The second one. We also see here that scholarships will switch to contracts, which can be negotiated. Remember, it could be scholarships right now are 1-year scholarships. They could be 2, they could be 4, they could be 5. They could be, 4 plus NIL, whatever the situation is there. Remember here, NFL players file tax returns in each state they played in. That's very important there. So NFL players have to file like 7, 8 tax returns sometimes, depending upon how many states that they play in. We also have athletes will be offered benefits. Remember here, and unions will also argue for pensions. So NIL dollars will have to fuse with wages, and those will be taxed. And NIL will also be included in negotiated contracts. I guarantee that's going to happen. Now, right now, it's a weird situation because that some of the NIL, actually, a lot of NIL happens out of universities with these collectives. There's a lot of stuff that's going to have to go there. However, the federal government likes their tax money, and if you get paid from a collective, they're going to want it. So again, it's probably going to be rolled into the one thing there. And then also here at the bottom there, it says athletes in schools will have to pay taxes on scholarships, room and board, meals, and stipends will most likely be handled by universities hiking tuition for non-athletes. Guarantee that's going to happen. Universities have no problem hiking tuition, so they're going to keep on doing it. So I mentioned before a leased player. Does anybody know anything about European soccer? A lot of European soccer and a lot of other organizations will do this thing where they have a player on loan. A player on loan is assigned with one team, but we want to get them experience over here with this other team, so we want them to play. We send them to another team. So think about this. You're Ohio State. You're like, dude, we got this guy. He's coming in. He's a 4-star player. He's close to being, he's third string. He's fighting between third and fourth string right now. We really like him. However, if he's his freshman redshirt season, it's going to be really rare for him to get on the field. However, Miami, Ohio over there, we don't play them next year. Miami, Ohio needs a player. What if we send them over here to have him play for them? That's a very real possibility that can be negotiated. Again, I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but it's something that you can consider here. So as an example, an athlete that might not play much at the school they signed with can be designated to another school for a certain amount of time. I would assume it would be after their redshirt season. So somebody signs on, they have their redshirt season, they train up with the team, they do all that, they go together with that. At the end of that redshirt's done, they're ready to play, and their NCAA clock has started, so to say. The coach comes to them, and he's like, dude, I just don't think you're going to get over here and play very much. However, we run a very similar offense to this team over here. We want you to go over there and play. There'll be a lot that have to be negotiated, whether or not the offensive scheme is very similar, whether or not we actually want it to be FBS versus FCS. That could be its whole situation. So there's certain things that would have to work out there. Remember here, a lot of these coaches, they really like the fact that they have a lot of control of these players. Them giving them to another coach, it's just, I don't know, it'd be a lot there, but it's possible here. Now, tuition, wages, and meal stipend would be paid by school A, but they would attend school B or just play for school B and go to class online for school A. It depends on the type of, the classes. Remember here that credits can transfer from one university to the other, so it's a possibility. But again, it's a lot to work through. Schools could also come to agreements with each other on these sorts of items. Players could be called up in case of injuries, similar to minor major leagues in baseball and hockey. So as an example, somebody gets designated to AAA, but then they got 2 injuries. They call him up mid-season. He comes up. That could happen at Miami, Ohio. Is it going to happen? I have no idea, but it's a possibility out there. But remember, all this would be a huge logistical headache. I don't suspect any of it's going to happen. But again, these are the types of things that you're going to have to talk about when you go from a scholarship player to now an employee. These things can be possible. So you think about that right there. Employees, so we switch from college athletes to employees, okay? How are they going to pay wages? Is it just scholarships? How do they pay taxes? Does the university pay the taxes for them? Do they pay the employer portion? Do they pay their employee portion? There's so many weird situations that you don't really think about when this comes up. Again, what about the states that are right to work states? What about the states that aren't? So there's so many questions that happen from here, but remember here, this is going to take forever because this is the NCAA and public institutions as opposed to the NFL, which has a private institution with a private union that come together. Again, there could be multiple unions. What if one conference strikes and another one doesn't? Again, many questions to answer for the future. We're just getting started. All right, guys, get in the comments right now. What do you think about this whole situation? There's a lot to work through here. I've touched on like 5% of it, but again, get in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. Remember here, like, share, comment, subscribe. Also follow if you're on Twitter there. I'll see you guys later. I am out.